Morning, everyone. So we're just on break. This is the early morning update. So the government opened this morning by citing the no confidence examples that the JCCF was bringing yesterday, saying that one of the reasons that Justin Trudeau prorogued Parliament is by saying essentially avoiding a confidence vote. The government is arguing that, well, confidence votes are speculative. You don't know whether they're going to happen or not. Which is an interesting argument considering that Trudeau essentially came out and said that they are trying to avoid a confidence vote. So that's an interesting one to consider. Their whole basis of argument in defending against this seems to be around the fact that the government is arguing that the courts don't have jurisdiction, and they're arguing that there's actually no specific law around prorogation. So if there is no law around prorogation, then the government can't create a law around prorogation because it's all based on political actions and convention, which is pretty incredible if you consider the implications about this. Chief Justice also brought up the fact about, well, what about the argument from the JCCF that he was acting in a partisan manner? And the government's position on that is essentially, so what? So what? He can prorogue for a partisan nature. That's just fine. That's essentially what they're arguing, because it's a political act and that the court shouldn't be weighing in on that at all. Chief Justice also asked, okay, so one of the whole points of the legislative branch is to actually hold the government to account, which is the executive branch. And the government agreed with that. So Chief Justice says, well, how are they supposed to hold the government to account if it's prorogued? And the government looked at him in a straight face and said, well, when they come back. Well, they have no real choice as to when they come back until the executive branch decides when they come back. So that's part of the problem, isn't it? So that was an incredible claim. But if you boil down the government's argument, they're essentially saying there's no limit. And she even said there's no limit. Government can do whatever it wants when it comes to prorogation. They can prorogue for any reason at all. They can prorogue because the Prime Minister doesn't like somebody. They can prorogue because he wants to go, have an early holiday for the Super Bowl. He can prorogue for any reason he wants. He can prorogue to go to a partisan political event. That's essentially their position on that, and that's what the JCCF and the Democracy Watch and the BCCLA are arguing, is that, well, that's actually not constitutional. That's governing in bad faith, and that's not following the principle of responsible government, which they were talking about yesterday. So this is very interesting that they're taking this line, and my view on all this is that listen, the whole point of the three branches is a separation of power, but the other branches should be able to hold each other to account. So my point is that when the legislative branch is unable to hold the government to account, which is during a period of prorogation, like they literally can do nothing to hold the government to account while the government is prorogued, then that should allow the judiciary branch to be able to step in and hold the government to account if needed. The other point that the government is making is there is no legal grounds and legal reference or legal test that the Chief Justice can make to actually make a ruling on this. Well, that wouldn't be a new thing, because there are many cases where laws have been made, rulings have been made on a lack of a legal measure, and that has in fact created law that other judges and Chief Justices have used in order to measure future cases. So that's a pretty flimsy argument in my opinion, but this is the problem with the government's position, is that they're on the wrong side of this right now, and there's not a lot that they can stand on. So they are relying on technicality, and they are relying on just, we don't want you to get involved, so therefore you shouldn't get involved. That seems to be the government's case here. The JCCF, Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, they are going to be able to respond later. But the other interesting fact is that even the intervener, which is an organization on the side of the government, agrees with the applicants that there should be a limit on this. And the Chief Justice even called that out. So the government's the only one that's saying, no, there shouldn't be a limit. Well, of course the government's going to say that. And the Chief Justice even kind of laughed about this as well, saying, saying, well, how would you ever put a limit on this if the courts don't get involved? And the government says, well, the legislative branch can do that. But the government also says that the executive branch has a lot of control over the legislative branch. So the judge says, well, how could that even happen if the executive branch doesn't want it to happen? So this is where arguments are reduced to absurdity and they don't really hold water, right? So it's going to be really interesting how the rest of this day plays out. But I got to get back up there because break time is almost up, and we'll get back to it. So I'll see you in there, folks, and continue with the updates. And next video will come out after the next break when we go to lunch. See you soon.